All right, everybody, welcome to Beach Talk Radio. We're going to have a little chat here with Gil Smart from Friends of the Everglades, and he's going to be filling us in on this recent Senate Bill 2508 that you might have read about in the newsletter, and just give us a little bit more information on what it is, what the concerns were, kind of what the changes, and what we're going to see going forward. So I'm going to bring him on in. Hello, Mr. Smart. Thank you so much for joining us at Beach Talk Radio. How are you this
I'm
afternoon?
doing well. My pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Great. So this is Gil Smart. He's the Director of Policy for Friends of the Everglades and Executive Director of Vote Water. Is that correct?
That is correct, indeed.
Oh, great. And Friends of the Everglades, just if anyone doesn't know, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving America's Everglades and its interconnected ecosystems. And it was originally founded by environmental activist Marjorie Stoneham Douglas in 1969.
Yep, author of the River of Grass, yes.
Yes. So how long have you been with Friends of the Everglades, and what does your role entail?
It'll be a year actually in March. I'm a longtime journalist. Now my role consists of sort of analyzing policy, such as policy proposals in the state legislature, tracking them. We interact with legislators to sort of let them know what our position on some of these bills are. We do a lot of sort of public outreach, just in terms of we produce a legislative preview of all the legislation coming down the pike. We just finished up a mid-session report. We'll follow up once the legislative session is over, but and it goes beyond the legislature as well. I mean, my job as policy director is to sort of ride herd over policy issues that come up either in the legislature, locally within some of the communities here in sort of southeast Florida, as well as the water management district and other issues that sort of affect the quality of water in our neck of the woods and throughout the region.
Okay, great. And we're going to discuss Senate Bill 2508, which appeared seemingly out of nowhere in early February and created quite an uproar and concerned so many environmental groups, fishing industry folks, citizens throughout the state, and other stakeholders. Can you first tell us the concerns with the original bill, and then we can discuss kind of the timeline and the amendments which were developed before it went to the full Senate on the 17th?
The concerns with the bill were actually two separate things, if you will. First off was the content of the bill itself. It seemed inspired, at least the provisions that sort of concerned us and a lot of other environmental groups most. It seemed inspired by an attempt to undermine the 3-year process of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to write a new playbook, use that term, for how Lake Okeechobee is managed. It's called the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, or LOSOM. Plus the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, the EAA Reservoir, which is currently being built south of Lake Okeechobee, which is going to help mitigate some of the discharges and the algae crises we've seen over here on the East Coast. And I know you folks over there that have been dealing with the red tide, made worse by, nutrients in the water flushed from Lake Okeechobee. So there's been this whole effort underway. I'm sure, you're well aware in recent years to not only build the reservoir, but actually for the Army Corps of Engineers to rewrite this playbook and sort of manage the lake in a more equitable fashion. This legislation sought to undermine all of that by, number one, diluting the pool of funding available for the reservoir, and then number two, writing provisions into state law that would essentially require the lake to be managed first and foremost for the benefit of water supply, which includes the sugar companies primarily south of the lake, other agriculture, and municipal users south of Lake Okeechobee as well. The other aspect of this, which was really troubling, was 2 weeks ago today, was introduced on a Friday. And it was introduced as what was called a conforming bill. Conforming bills are not supposed to contain any major policy changes. This one contained huge policy changes. And by putting it in a conforming bill, that meant there would only be one hearing before it went to the full Senate. So it just detonated like a bomb, really. And everybody who pays attention to these issues, the ears went up when all of a sudden you got this bill being filed on a Friday and the hearing is going to be only 3 business days later. And then once people got into the teeth of what was actually in the bill, people couldn't believe it. And the environmental community knew we had to mobilize quickly. and that happened. And it, and ultimately then, as your listeners may be aware, an amendment was filed by the Senate sponsor Ben Albritton earlier this week. The amended bill passed. The amended bill is significantly better than the original bill, but concerns remain.
Okay, and can you? I know when you were talking, because you spoke at the Appropriations Committee meeting,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I
And
did.
so, when you're talking about how would this bill originally have led to more toxic algae blooms affecting the estuaries, both east, but west too?
The original bill would have required, as a condition of receiving funding for the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir and other projects, it would have required the South Florida Water Management District to certify to the President of the Florida Senate and the Speaker of the Florida House that all the provisions essentially comported with state law that requires the lake essentially to be managed to keep more water in it than is absolutely necessary. This has been a big sort of aspect of the loathsome debates in recent months. Is there's what's in the way that the lake is managed, there's what's called a water shortage management band. And once the water gets down, it means the water in the lake is low. And once it gets down to the water shortage management band, then you got to start making decisions. That's when cutbacks can occur for agriculture, for municipal users south of the lake. Our position, Friends of the Everglades, has advocated that water in the lake needs to be discharged to the Everglades and west of the Caloosahatchee, because as you probably know, the Caloosahatchee needs some water. Okay. And our position is those environmental uses of water should continue until we get, to or in the neighborhood of the water shortage management ban. But water supply interests have sought to create what they call what's been called like a buffer zone. They want, in other words, if at any given point in time, Lake Okeechobee gets down to 10.5 feet, they want a buffer zone of 1.5 feet that says, well, we're not going to wait till it gets that low before we start conserving water. We want a 1.5 foot buffer zone. We're going to start, conserving it once it gets to around like 11.5 or 12 feet, something like that. Our position is, and it would have been sort of written into state law to basically keep more water in the lake than is necessary. Our position is, look, you do that, the lake starts to fill up, when the rainy season comes, because you got more water in there. All of a sudden you got high lake levels. All of a sudden you got damage to the lake. All of a sudden you've got a greater chance of discharges to the estuaries, potential additional algae crisis. That's what we said. We believe that this bill in its original form would have significantly increased the chance of harmful discharges and harmful algae on both coasts. So.
Great. And you mentioned, and I found this, I don't know, it was staggering, I guess, that roughly 95% of Lake O's permitted water is allocated to EAA farmers.
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
So they do not then have their own reservoir.
No, they do not. They rely on the lake for irrigation water.
So, okay. So they rely on the lake for irrigation of their crops. So, I mean, it seems like irrigation is integral to your business, but it's not something that you own or have provided on your own. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. And again, this is the permitted uses. They've got permits for all this. The state writes them permits for how much they're allowed, that sort of thing. So, and they're trying to protect that. And I get that, you know what I mean? It is an aspect of your business model to make sure that you have adequate water for irrigation. But by the same token, again, we know that if the Everglades needs the water, frankly, the Caloosahatchee needs the water, frankly. So the question becomes, look, should you be keeping more water in the lake in order to provide insurance, essentially, for water users? Or, and if that requires cutting off flows to the Everglades, cutting off flows to the Caloosahatchee, and if you do keep more water in the lake than is necessary, don't you run the risk? And this is our position, that the answer to this question is yes. Don't you run the risk of, once the wet season gets here and all of a sudden, well, the lake's higher than we thought it was going to be at this point, and now we got trouble, So, the way the lake has been managed for decades has privileged agriculture over virtually all other users. The thing about the loathsome process is it's a specific attempt to craft a more equitable approach, one that shares the benefits and shares the adversity. And what this looked like to us, this bill was an attempt by the sugar industry in particular, but other water users as well, to slough off, and I said this in the Senate, to basically make sure that everyone else takes the adversity. So.
All right. And so following that, there was really, people, there was petitions to be signed. I know I signed one. There was links that were put out for people to contact their senators, which, I think a lot of people did. I mean, I think Captains for Clean Water had, I don't know, 30,000, 40,000, people really, the word got out and people really, really spoke up. So what happened between the 10th and the 17th?
Well, there was a huge outpouring of concern, and people did mobilize. At the hearing that I spoke at, the sole Senate Appropriations Committee hearing on this, there were probably 3 to 4 dozen people there who, a lot of them, fishing guys who's just this is their livelihood, this is their life, and poor water quality harms them, harms their business. So you had guys who drove 6 and 8 hours just to be there, and gave up thousands of dollars worth of charters that had been booked for that day to show up at their sole opportunity to have a say in this and to speak against it. And what I think, and so, they did, but what I think made a lot of people angry was the extent to which a lot of the senators seemed to really discount what they had to say. It was almost insulting the way they were treated, the way they were, it was almost as if, well, you don't really understand this legislation. Well, have you checked the cross references? Well, do you know what this statute says? I mean, it was insulting. These were constituents. These were people who had made a tough decision and a long haul to get there. And they basically treated them like little children who didn't understand what was going on. And it got to the point, now I understand they had a full schedule that day. But the chair of the committee, Senator Kelly Stargell, ultimately cut people's public comment period down to 45 seconds, and sometimes not even that if she decided that someone else had already made those points. So you drive 8 hours to be able to speak for 45 seconds. I think that angered people as well, and it should have. It should have. They were disrespected. Their concerns were disrespected, and so once it passed, the Senate Appropriations Committee, I think it just redoubled the resolve of everyone who was opposed to this, that, we're not going to let this go without a fight. And I got to give a lot of credit. Captains for Clean Water and the Everglades Foundation and some other organizations really, really mobilized people. And that was key. There were tens of thousands of emails to legislators. There were thousands of phone calls, and it just, I don't know that the people behind this legislation expected there to be this much reaction. Because again, it shows up on a Friday. Its sole hearing is on a Wednesday. Governor DeSantis said it was being rammed through, and that's exactly what was happening. And I think, the expectation was that it was being pushed through so quickly, there wouldn't be an opportunity for opponents to mobilize. But in fact, opponents mobilize very quickly. Social media helps with that immensely. You're able to sort of rally people, and people are already paying attention to these sorts of things. You have sort of a constituency and audience, who are, on your Facebook page, following your Twitter feed and Instagram, and people feel very, very strongly about this, and they responded. And I really think the people pushed back on this, and the people helped force that amendment to be filed and water this bill down to the point where it's palatable, I guess. We still oppose it because there's still some other bad things in there that weren't taken out. But it's much less damaging than it otherwise would have been.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I watched a lot of the comments and a lot of the commentors, and it was really the first time that I had taken the time to do that. And I was frankly, I was shocked at the way many folks were treated. And I thought, well, there's no way I would want to go
Right.
and say my piece, because it's intimidating enough.
Right.
And then to be treated like, I know Vice Chair Scott Wagner from the South Florida Water Management District said in their February 10th meeting that, in my world, the onus is not on the citizens to explain the bill to the Senate. It's on the Senate to explain the bill to concerned citizens. And,
Right.
and I thought, that is a great statement. So, yeah, it was a little cringy at times because it was kind of rough, and for some of the folks that were there, it was really rough.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it was disrespectful. I mean, the way
Mhm.
that these senators treated these, are, we're talking public servants here, and this is the public. You have an obligation to listen to them. You have an obligation to respect them. You have an obligation to let them have their say, rather than cutting them off, rather than asking them if they've read all the cross references, rather than insisting that they should know the legislation up, down, back, forward, and upside down before they're qualified to comment. That was very much the attitude. And again, I think that ticked people off, and it should have. It should have.
Well, I think it was great to see that, exactly like you said, it got out there and enough pressure was brought to bear that kind of again at the last minute an amendment went through. And I know it doesn't go as far as like you were saying that it would be great. Is there still time to improve this bill?
Well, this becomes part of the budget process now, and so it depends on what the House is going to do. There's a possibility that not all of these provisions ultimately get through. So everybody is keeping an eye on this at this point. We can't let down our guard at this point just because sort of the roughest edges have been sanded off via this amendment. Like I said, there's still bad stuff in this bill. We would like to see it defeated. We do not see that this bill is necessary, in any respect. And again, it's going to make some big changes to the way Florida does wetlands permitting. It's going to make some big changes in terms of allowing the Florida Department of Agriculture to, acquire land, possibly, theoretically in competition with the Florida Forever program. There's some other aspects to this bill as well. It's just, they're very, very questionable. And so, there's no guarantee that these are going to become part of, the ultimate, sort of package, so to speak. There's not really going to be an opportunity for people to speak against them. However, we say, continue to call your legislature, send some more emails, make your voice heard, because it was heard this time around. And it's important that people realize that. It's important that people realize they made a difference, because they did. They really did.
Now, we have one question from our audience, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer this.
That's right.
Jim Adderhold asks, is there a relationship between Senate President Wilton Simpson and Big Sugar?
At the hearing that I was at on, I believe it was the 9th, Eric Eichenberg, who was the CEO of the Everglades Foundation, got up and said that he was summoned. That was his term, summoned. He was summoned to a meeting with Wilton Simpson, and I believe it was U.S. Sugar officials, who were basically summoning him to tell him what they wanted. And Wilton Simpson has gotten a significant amount of campaign donations. His campaign, the Friends for Wilton Simpson, have got a significant amount of campaign donations from PACs, political action committees, that take a lot of money from the sugar companies. So I think it's fair to say that he has significant backing from the sugar industry, and as such, is very likely friendly to their interests. And this bill was, the manifestation of that, really.
All right. Well, is there any other information you would like to get out?
I would just say that if you participated in this process, if you sent an email, if you made a phone call, thank you. Thank you, because it helped. It really did help. You made a difference. And as I said, don't back off now. I think, the amount of heat, the amount of pressure that was brought by regular citizens who were outraged about this, sort of changed the course of this legislation. Otherwise, Eichenberg said it at the rally yesterday. Normally we'd get rolled, I think was his term. We get rolled. We didn't get rolled this time. And that is thanks, almost entirely to the people who stood up and say, no, we're not going to take this, So I would say continue to do that. It made a difference this time. It can make a difference in the future.
Well, great. And I don't want to let you go without mentioning the next clean water conversation, which can you tell people a little bit about what those are and
Sure.
that they can go back and listen to old ones? Because those are very informative. I appreciate them.
Thank you. It's usually hosted by my boss, Executive Director Eve Samples, Executive Directors of the Friends of the Everglades. It's a monthly conversation that we have we post it live to our social media feeds. On sort of an issue that has to do with clean water, Lake Okeechobee management, sort of the issues that we follow. And this time around next week, we're going to be talking about this very issue. I'm going to be on the program. Eve's going to be there. Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch, who's a member of the South Florida Water Management District, is going to be there. And Dr. Royal Gardner, who's an attorney at the Stetson University School of Law, I believe is going to be there as well. So we're going to, sort of dissect this. The South Florida Water Management District got blindsided by this legislation. You mentioned Scott Wagner. The board members had some really, really interesting things to say as a result of all this. So I'm anticipating with Jackie, on the program, I'm anticipating it's going to be, more of a deep dive into this issue. What happened, what's happening now, and what to look for in the future.
Yes, I listened to their meeting on the 10th, and she spoke very passionately.
Yes.
So that I'm looking forward to that. And that is February 23rd at noon. So I'll have to catch it after work, but on Facebook. And like I said, there's been some other ones. And so folks can go and listen to those, and they really do explain everything. So Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you've had a very busy week, and really thank you for all you guys do to represent and get people, educated, because people just don't have the time to really take a deep dive into this. So
and that's where organizations like us or like Captains or whomever can help. If we can sort of distill what's going on down, to the point where people who don't have the time to sit and study the legislation all day can know what's going on, it's beneficial for everybody. So,
well, thank you, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your comments and great questions. And please, mark your calendar for February 23rd at noon. They do a great job with that clean water conversations, and we'll continue to bring you what we can. And have a wonderful weekend. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9. Take care. Bye.